So I want to start with just a little bit of a Bible lesson, and this is information some of you know, certainly mom knows it, but um, we have four gospels, right? And John is its own weird thing. If you read them, you can tell John is off in his own world. Matthew, Mark, and Luke are known as the synoptic gospels, and scholarly consensus is that Mark was written first. It's the shortest, and most all the stuff in Mark is also in Matthew and or Luke. So it seems like Matthew and Luke, probably not their names, but we'll just use those names for simplicity's sake. They used Mark. And they also had another source that they shared that scholars call Q, which we don't have Q, but we know that there was some source they had access to that Mark didn't, because there are pieces that are in Luke and in Matthew that aren't in Mark. And then of course there's some unique pieces to Matthew and to Luke. So they had their own then separate sources. And this parable of the workers being hired to come work in the vineyard is unique to Matthew. It's one of those pieces that is from some unidentified source that Matthew had. And my theory is that Matthew heard this story from his friend Fred, who had this experience of being a worker. And Fred had told the story to Jesus and was very proud of the fact that his story made it into one of Jesus's sermons. So when he heard Matthew was writing this book about Jesus, he made sure to tell Matthew his story that Jesus had used in the sermon, which of course is that one day Fred woke up late because his baby had kept him up half the night, and he rushed to the marketplace, but the workers had already been hired, and he was really worried about how he was going to feed his family that day. And fortunately, he was really relieved when someone came along at 9 o'clock and was hiring more workers. And the guy said he would pay me what was fair. And Fred was not sure that he really trusted that, but he didn't have any other options. So and then his buddy Hank, who was also there because Hank's kind of scrawny and didn't get hired earlier, they went off to work. And Fred was really surprised when even more people showed up. At noon, there was some guy with a limp and a couple of older guys. And then at 3 o'clock, Bart showed up, still hungover. Bart never got any work because he was always hungover, but Fred was happy to see him because he knew Bart's wife and kids really needed some food. And then, lo and behold, at 5 o'clock, even more people came. And Fred was pretty sure one of those people was the widow from the village who was trying to pass herself off as a guy so she could make some money to feed her four kids. And when it was all over, the workday was finally done, the manager lined them up. The widow was first in line going through, and Fred was feeling pretty good that he might actually get some good money when the manager gave the widow a full day's wage, that everybody ended up getting the same amount of money. And some of the folks, especially the ones who got there earliest in the day, were pretty mad about it. But Fred told Jesus he wasn't really that upset because he knew that the widow's kids needed money. He knew that Bart's family needed money. He knew that his wife and family needed the full day's wage, even though he didn't work a full day. So this is my theory about how the story got into Matthew's gospel. And I just want to say God bless Fred, because he has this grace for the later hired workers because he knows their circumstances, because he knows what they've been through. I was looking through reading through an old sermon over the weekend with a story I'd forgotten from some of you might remember Roger Martin's mother, Esther, and there was a time she was going in to have a pretty serious surgery, And Barbara reported on this, one of those, if you don't make it out of this alive kind of conversations, what advice do you have for us? And Esther's advice was to not judge people too harshly because you don't know what their lives have been. And that is definitely a piece that we can take from this parable. I think we don't know why some of the workers didn't start working until 9 or noon or 3 or 5. And it made me think about, I was thinking about this as I was reading some about why some lawmakers in our state oppose Medicaid expansion. And there's a lot of rhetoric about how young, healthy, able-bodied people should be working, not getting a free ride. Right now, we'll set aside the factual problem of, I think 40% of the people who would get healthcare coverage are children who should not be expected to be working anyway. That's a separate factual issue. But also there's this assumption in that you know what someone's life is, that you can look at someone and tell how healthy they are, how able their body is, how able their mind is. I have a young, healthy, able-bodied son who couldn't possibly hold down a 40-hour-a-week job. And there are all kinds of things going on in people's lives that we have no ideas about. And there the parallels here too, because, with Medicaid expansion, we're not talking about buying young, able-bodied people who aren't working mansions to live in, right? We're talking about providing basic health care. And in this story, the money that people are being paid, this is not an exorbitant sum. This is a regular daily wage for a laborer. This will buy food. If they're lucky, it will buy food for their whole family for the day. This is what Jesus, when he prays to give us our daily bread, this is the wage people need for their daily bread. This is from the Psalm reading. This is the manna that shows up on the ground and the quail. This is just what people need to get through the day. And so having this grace of not thinking that why someone is or isn't doing whatever kind of work you think they should be doing. That's part of what's going on in the parable. And I've also found myself thinking about the people who were hired at 5 o'clock or even 3 o'clock. And if any of them had a little niggling in the back of their mind, like, I don't deserve a full day's wage. I don't deserve this money because I didn't work the whole day. And so there's a piece of not just holding back from the judgment and resentment we might be tempted to have for other people, but also not judging ourselves too harshly, having grace for ourselves when we feel like we should have done something or we don't deserve something, because we all deserve the daily wage. Right? So there's this odd little parable, and obviously with all of Jesus' parables, there's so many different ways to read them, which is one of the things I love about them. One very helpful way to read this parable, I think, is as a reminder of grace, to have grace for other people, to have grace for ourselves, because we don't know what people have been through. We don't know all the circumstances in people's lives. And this is also a parable that demonstrates the radical economics of God's reign, or in Matthew's gospel, Jesus calls this the kingdom of heaven. At the very beginning of this reading, right? Jesus talks about the kingdom of heaven. And the economics of God's reign are very different from what we have set up in our capitalist system and what the ancient Romans had set up in their empire. The economics of the kingdom means everybody should have what they need, regardless of how long they work. It means that there's enough for everybody. It means that you getting what you need does not threaten or detract from my ability to also have what I need, because there is enough. The economics of God's reign is a place where our worth is not determined by cultural standards of productivity. It's not determined by being able to do all the things that other people or that we ourselves think that we should be doing. It's a place where we all deserve dignity and we all deserve our daily bread, not because of how hard we work in the vineyard, but because we are all beloved children of God. Amen.